The cold, ungrateful daughter who wouldn't even cry if her mother died. That was the line my mother said in the kitchen, 40 seconds before she clutched her chest in the middle of my engagement party and started screaming for an ambulance. I picked up my phone, I put it on speaker. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, I need an ambulance. My mom says she's having chest pain. She's on the floor in front of me. The address is 411 Queens Road West, Charlotte, North Carolina, 282. My mother stood up. She did not stagger. She did not cough. She brushed lint off her cardigan and stared at me like a woman who had just realized the curtain was up and the audience had walked home. The 911 operator was still on the line. So was a secret I had carried for 21 years. If this story is already getting under your skin, please take half a second to hit like and subscribe. It tells YouTube to put this in front of someone else who needs to hear it. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you all are listening from. I'm Beatrix Lockhart, 35 years old. To understand why my mother stood up that night, we have to go back to a piano recital in 1999, and to the night, 5 years later, that my father went to bed and did not wake up. I'm a financial investigative reporter at the Asheville Sentinel-Times. In our newsroom, they call me Cold Lockhart, and they don't mean it kindly. They mean I can sit across from a man who is stolen from a children's hospice and ask him about cash flow without my voice moving by a single note. That's what they think professional means. That is not what professional means. That is what surviving means. I live in a small wooden house in Montford, the old Asheville neighborhood with rocking chairs on the porches. I do my work. I walk to the co-op for coffee. I see Aaron on weekends. Aaron Pruitt. He is a forensic accountant at Cravens and Hale, the boutique audit firm downtown. We met 3 years ago on a money laundering case involving a farmers' cooperative. He read spreadsheets like other men read poetry, and I asked him to teach me, and we never stopped talking about it. In March of this year, he proposed at a turnout on the Blue Ridge Parkway. He held my hands. He said, "I am asking, you decide." That is the way he speaks. I said yes. We did not announce it on Instagram. We told my Aunt Helen first. Aunt Helen is my father's youngest sister. She is 70 now. She lives in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte, in a brick bungalow with hydrangeas, and she has never once asked me about my feelings. That is why I trust her. The day Aaron and I told her about the engagement, she said, "Then we are having the party at my house. This is your father's family, not your mother's." I should explain my mother. My mother is Olivia Lockhart, 64 years old, of Hendersonville, North Carolina. To anyone who has met her at a women's club potluck or a quilting circle, she is a soft-voiced widow who has battled a weak heart and chronic anxiety for 30 years. She is small, she is well-dressed. She wears cardigans the color of butter and a single thin gold chain. Strangers move chairs for her. Strangers call her sweetheart. To the people who have stood in a room with her at any moment of meaning in my life, my 5th grade spelling bee, my 7th grade swim meet, my high school graduation, the day I got my first byline in the Sentinel-Times, she is the woman who has clutched her chest and asked for an ambulance. She has done it 20 times that I have counted. I have counted carefully. I started keeping the list in a notebook the year I turned 15 because at 15, I already understood that I would need evidence one day. I just did not know what evidence I would need it for. The notebook is in my desk drawer. 20 entries dated with locations and weather and what time of day. 20 entries that no one but me has ever seen. The party at Aunt Helen's was the 21st. The thing about her episodes is that they are perfectly timed. Not before the cake. Not after the cake. During the toast. During the moment my college dean said my name. During the moment I told my brother Brian I had gotten the promotion to senior investigations. There is always an audience. There is always a witness she wants to claim her as a victim afterward. She does not collapse alone in her kitchen at 3 p.m. She has never once collapsed alone in her kitchen at 3 p.m. Brian is my older brother. 38 bridge engineer, lives in Knoxville with his wife Whitney and his 4-year-old Hudson. Brian believes our mother, not because he is naive, because he is tired. Tired is its own kind of belief. My father was Ethan Lockhart. He died on December 14th of 2004. He was 48. I was 14. He went to bed and did not wake up. And my mother called 911 50 minutes after she found him. I did not cry at the funeral. Everyone said so. Aunt Helen said so. Brian said so. My mother said so most of all, into anyone's ear who would listen. Beatrix did not cry. Can you believe that? Beatrix did not cry. I did not cry. I was busy listening, and what I was listening to was a story that did not yet have a name. The first time my mother fainted in public was at my piano recital in November of 1999. I was 9 years old. I had been practicing Für Elise for 4 months in a small room above the dentist's office in Hendersonville, North Carolina, with Mrs. Petrosky, who smelled like cinnamon gum and corrected my fingering with a yellow pencil. The recital was at the Hendersonville Performing Arts Center. 12 children, folding chairs, plastic cups of punch. My mother wore a pearl-colored sweater. My father wore a navy blue suit because he had a meeting in Charlotte that afternoon and had driven straight here to make it. He sat in the 3rd row. He gave me a thumbs up before I went on. I was the 8th student. I sat at the piano. I lifted my hands. I played 4 notes. And my mother stood up in the 3rd row and made a sound that began low in her throat and ended high in the back of the auditorium. And she sat back down, and Mrs. Petrosky stopped the recital and the lights came up. And my father was kneeling beside her, asking her to breathe. And a paramedic was called, and we left before the 9th student played. That night in the car, my father drove. My mother sat in the front, her hand on her chest. She said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I just couldn't catch my breath." She said this looking at me in the rearview mirror. I said nothing. My father said, "She's okay, Trix. The paramedics said she's okay." I knew the paramedics had said she was okay. I had been there. I had heard them. What I was thinking about was how she had told me 2 hours earlier while she was curling my hair that she did not understand why anyone watched piano. "It's the most boring instrument," she had said. "Just sit there and press buttons." She had laughed when she said it. She had handed me a hairpin. She had not been short of breath when she said it. I did not have a word for what I was thinking that night. I was 9, but the file folder was open. The next time was at my 5th grade end-of-year ceremony. I was getting a citizenship award. My name was about to be called. My mother coughed twice, then loudly. The principal paused. She coughed louder. The principal called my name. She coughed louder still and asked for water. Someone brought water. The principal hesitated, looked at her, looked at me, and called the next student. We sat through the rest of the ceremony with my mother fanning her face with a program. Afterward, in the parking lot, my mother said, "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm just under the weather." She said this to me. To my father, she said in a different voice, "She knew I was going to need the inhaler today." I told her this morning, I did not have the inhaler. There was no inhaler. There had never been an inhaler. The inhaler was a story she liked to tell. That was the year my father started watching her. He was a contracts attorney before he stopped practicing and moved us from Charlotte down to Hendersonville. He read for a living. He noticed patterns, the way some men notice bird calls. I think the recital opened something in him. I think the 5th grade ceremony confirmed it. I think by the time my swim meet in the 7th grade rolled around, the regional meet, the one I had qualified for, the meet where she clutched her chest at the starting line, and the officials made my coach pull me out of the heat. By then my father knew. The look on his face when they pulled me out of the heat was not love. It was math. He started keeping a small notebook of his own. I did not know about that notebook then. I would learn about it later. He died on December 14th of 2004. He was 48. He went to bed at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. He did not wake up. My mother told the paramedic she had found him at 1 in the morning. She told my brother she had found him at 1:15. She told my Aunt Helen she had found him at 1:20. She told the obituary writer at the local paper she had found him at 1:30. The 911 call was placed at 1:53. She said she had been in the shower. She said she had not heard him. When the paramedic arrived, her hair was dry. Her pajamas were dry. The bath mat was dry. I noticed because I was the one who let them in. I was the one in the hallway. I was the one who walked them up the stairs. I was the one who saw my father's face. I knew at 14 that you can sometimes tell whether a person has been dead for 10 minutes or for 10 hours, and I did not know which it was, only that it was not 10 minutes. I did not cry. I did not cry the night he died. I did not cry at the funeral. I did not cry at the cemetery. I did not cry when my mother stood at his graveside and told the women from the women's club that Ethan had been a difficult man at the end and that she had cared for him as best she could. I did not cry, and so I was punished. For 21 years, the cold, ungrateful daughter, I have heard that sentence more times than I have heard my own name. I thought I was unfeeling. I thought there was something missing inside me. I thought I had been born wrong. I thought my mother was right. It took me 21 years to understand the truth. I was not cold. I was surviving. I left Hendersonville at 17 on a partial scholarship to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a duffel bag of clothes and my father's reading lamp. I did not look back. My mother called every Sunday. The calls began with a hello and became, within 4 minutes, a recitation. The neighbor's dog, the new pain in her lower back, the bill from the cardiologist, the way the cashier at Ingles had looked at her. The reason she could not drive to Charlotte to see Aunt Helen. The reason she could not come to Chapel Hill to see me. I listened. I said, "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom." I said it the way you fold a sheet. I did not lie. I did not pretend. I did not lean in. I just folded. In my sophomore year of college, in the spring of 2008, she called and asked me to come home for a weekend. She said she needed me to help her with paperwork. She said her hands were shaking too badly to fill in the forms. She said it was something to do with my father's estate. She said it was important. I drove down. I sat at the kitchen table. She pushed a thick stack of paper at me. She turned the top page over so I could not see what it said and pointed to a signature line on the back. "Sign here, sweetheart. It's just an authorization for the bank. They need it for the trust." I asked which trust. She said the educational trust. I asked which signature. She said, "Yours. The one your father set up for you and Brian. You're over 18 now. You have to sign for releases." I signed. I signed because I was 20 years old and tired, and because I trusted her on financial paperwork the way I had not trusted her on almost anything else. Money was boring. Money was paperwork. Money was not theatrical. I signed 5 lines. I did not turn the pages over. I did not read what was above the signature. That was the first time. There were 18 times. I did not learn about the other 17 until November of this year. I got my first byline at the Asheville Sentinel-Times in the fall of 2014. I was 24. It was a small story. A county commissioner who had directed road paving contracts to his brother-in-law's company. 3 columns on page 7. My byline at the top. There was a small office party. Brian did not come. He was working a bridge job in eastern Tennessee. Aunt Helen came. She brought me a fountain pen with my initials engraved on the cap. She kissed my forehead. She said, "Your father would be proud." My mother came. She wore a cream-colored cardigan. She held a paper plate of cake. She looked at the byline on the wall where someone had pinned the front page, and she said very quietly, into the air between her and me, "Your father did not get to see this. You should be careful what you build on his grave." Then she sat down on the metal folding chair and could not breathe. It was the 8th episode. I stood next to her with a glass of water. I did not call an ambulance. I did not panic. I held the water. I asked her to drink. She drank. She looked up at me from the folding chair with eyes that did not match the face she was making, and I understood, for half a second, that she was performing for me, not for the room. The room had moved on. The room had not seen her at all. I was the only one looking. She made the face anyway. That was the moment I knew it would never stop. I dated 3 men between 2015 and 2020. 2 of them met her once. 1 of them met her twice. None of them lasted. I told myself I was the problem. I told myself I did not know how to let people in. I met Aaron in 2022. The first time he met my mother, she had what she called an attack of the lungs at the dinner table. Aaron stood up, walked around the table, knelt next to her, took her pulse, looked at his watch for 15 seconds, set her hand back in her lap, and said, "Your pulse is 62 and even, ma'am. Would you like some water?" She blinked at him. She had never in her life been spoken to that way. In the car on the way home, Aaron said, "Tricks. How long has she been doing that?" I said, "Since I was 9. He said, "Okay." He did not say, "Poor you." He did not say, "We have to do something." He said, "Okay." And he held my hand for the rest of the drive. And I understood for the first time in my adult life that someone could see what I had seen and not make me defend it. So I want to ask you something before we go any further. If your mother had fainted at every important moment of your life for 21 years, and on the 21st time you finally believed her, what would you do differently the 22nd? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. I really do. The 21st time was the night I got engaged. The 22nd never came. The engagement party was on Saturday, November 8th, 2025, at Aunt Helen's brick bungalow in Dilworth. Aunt Helen had insisted. She had said, "I will host it. Your mother will come as a guest. Your father's family will host." I had said yes because I was tired of fighting that fight and because I knew somewhere in the part of me that was always preparing for the next episode that something would happen if my mother was the host. Something always happened. We arrived at 5 p.m. The house was full of hydrangeas. Aaron's parents had driven up from Greenville the night before. Linda, Aaron's mother, had brought a sheet pan of lemon bars and a card with a watercolor of the Blue Ridge on the front. She handed it to me at the door. She said, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." I had to look down to keep my face still. My brother Brian arrived at 5:45 with Whitney and Hudson. Hudson was 4 and would not let go of my leg. Whitney handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside was a porcelain frog. Whitney said, "I am sorry, Hudson chose." I laughed for the first time that day. My mother arrived at 6:03. She wore a butter yellow cardigan and a single thin gold chain. She kissed Aunt Helen on the cheek without making contact. She told Linda how lovely the lemon bars looked. She put down a wrapped box on the table. I would not open it for 2 weeks. She went straight to the kitchen. I followed her with a tray. The kitchen was empty except for the 2 of us. She washed her hands at the sink. She turned to me. She said, "Sweetheart, do you really think Aaron understands what he is getting into?" I said, "He understands." She said, "He doesn't. He hasn't seen the cold. Aaron is a sweet boy. He has not seen the cold in you that I have seen." I said nothing. I put the tray down on the counter. Then Linda walked in. My mother turned a different face on, the way you put on a hat. "Linda, sweetheart, let me tell you about Aaron when he was little. The boy is just so dear. He is just so dear." Linda did not know what was happening. Linda set down a serving plate. My mother put her hand on Linda's arm and lowered her voice and said, in a tone she meant for me to hear, "Aaron is such a good boy. He hasn't yet seen what kind of daughter Beatrix is." I walked out of the kitchen. I walked into the living room. I went to the bar where Aaron was talking to Aunt Helen and Jeffrey Tate, who had driven over because Aunt Helen had asked him to. I put my hand on Aaron's arm. He looked at me. He said, "It is happening, isn't it?" I said, "Yes." We waited 2 minutes. My mother came out of the kitchen, walked into the center of the living room, made a small noise, like a hiccup, said, "Oh, oh, my chest, Beatrix, my chest," and sat down on the carpet with both hands flat over her sternum. The room stopped. Linda made a sound. Whitney pulled Hudson back. Brian started toward her. Aunt Helen did not move. Jeffrey did not move. Aaron did not move. I took out my phone. I dialed 911. I tapped the speaker. 911, what's your emergency? Hi. I need an ambulance. My mom says she's having chest pain. She's on the floor in front of me. The address is 411 Queens Road West, Charlotte, North Carolina. 2820. My mother stood up. She did not stagger. She brushed lint off her cardigan. She looked at me. The 911 operator was still on the line. "Ma'am, are you still there?" "Ma'am, what's the address?" I said into the phone. "Ma'am, I am sorry. It looks like the patient has spontaneously recovered. Please cancel the dispatch. Thank you." The operator said something I did not hear. I hung up. I put the phone in my pocket. 24 people were watching. My mother said, I felt better. I said, I see. She said, it must have been the lemon bars. Linda put her hand over her mouth. Brian sat down on the arm of the couch and did not look up for a long time. Aaron said, Olivia, would you like to sit down? His voice was very even. She sat. She drank a glass of water. She ate a small piece of cake. She left at 7:30. Aaron drove her to the Marriott downtown, where she had booked herself a room because she had told everyone the drive home would be too much for her heart. The party did not last past 8. On the way back to Asheville in Aaron's car at midnight, I did not speak. Aaron did not push. Outside Marion, North Carolina, my phone rang. It was Aunt Helen. She said, Beatrix, I have something. I should have given it to you a very long time ago. Can you come to Charlotte next weekend? I said, what is it? She said, it's in your father's box. I took it the night of the funeral because I was afraid your mother would burn his things. I never opened it. Tomorrow I'm going to open it. I think you need to be here. I said, I will be there. I hung up. Aaron, eyes on the road, said, Trix. I said, I think my father wrote something down before he died. Aaron said, then we will read it together. The drive from Asheville to Dilworth takes 2 hours and 10 minutes, longer if there is rain. There was rain. I left at 6 a.m. on Saturday, November 22nd, 2 weeks after the engagement party. Aaron was not with me. Aaron had stayed in Asheville because, he said, this part is yours. I will be there after. I arrived at Aunt Helen's at 8:30. She had coffee. She had set out 2 mugs and a small plate of toast. She had not eaten. She had been crying. Aunt Helen does not cry. I had seen her cry exactly once before, at my father's funeral, and even then only for the duration of the second hymn. She said, come up to the attic. The attic ladder pulled down from the ceiling in the hallway. Aunt Helen went first. I followed. The attic smelled like old wood. There was a single bare bulb. She walked past 3 Christmas boxes and an old sewing machine and a leather suitcase with a luggage tag that said E. Lockhart, and behind the suitcase, against the back wall, was a wooden crate the size of a small dresser drawer. The wood was the color of tea. Aunt Helen said, the night of the funeral, your mother told everyone she was going to throw out all of his clothes. She told me she did not want anything of his in the house. I came back that night with a flashlight and a station wagon, and I took everything I could carry. Most of it I gave to Brian and to you over the years. This box was the last. I never opened it. I do not know why. Perhaps I was afraid of what was in it. Perhaps I was afraid of what was not. She unbuckled the leather straps. She lifted the lid. Inside was a green flannel shirt that I knew. I knew it because my father had worn it the last time he had taken me hiking, the autumn before he died. I knew the smell of it the way you know the smell of a hallway in a house where you were once safe. There were 2 books, Black's Law Dictionary, the 4th edition, with a coffee stain on the cover and a paperback of A River Runs Through It, which I had given him for his birthday in 2003. There was a single photograph, Helen and my father at the beach in 1976, both of them in their 20s, both of them laughing, and beneath the photograph, in a brown envelope, sealed, addressed in my father's handwriting, was a letter. The address on the envelope was Jeffrey Tate, Esquire, 1320 East Boulevard, Charlotte, North Carolina. The postmark was Hendersonville, North Carolina, December 1st, 2004. Jeffrey Tate had never received it. Aunt Helen handed me the envelope. She said, "I will be downstairs. Read it alone." I sat on the attic floor and opened the envelope with my house key. There were 4 pages, written in blue ink, in my father's small, careful hand. I will not tell you everything the letter said. There are things in it I have not told anyone, even Aaron. I will tell you what I can tell you. My father had been keeping a notebook of his own. He had been counting, the way I had been counting, since 1999. He had 4 episodes in the notebook by the time he sat down to write the letter. He listed them in the letter by date. He said he did not believe his wife was sick. He said he had taken her to 2 cardiologists who had given her a clean bill of health. He said he had taken her to a pulmonologist who had told her, in private, that her breathing was normal. He said she had refused to follow up with any of them. He said she had told them all the same story, and the stories did not match the records. He said he had made a decision. He was going to file for divorce on December 21st, 2004. He had retained no attorney in Hendersonville because Hendersonville was small. He was reaching out to Jeffrey, his old partner, because Jeffrey had handled estates with sensitivity. He was asking Jeffrey to restructure the trusts he had set up for me and for Brian, to insulate them from his wife's signature, to make sure that if anything happened to him, the children's money could not be touched by their mother. He apologized to Helen. He said she had been left out for too long. He said he had not wanted her dragged into a marriage that he believed had broken in slow motion over 15 years. And at the bottom of page 4, he wrote a single sentence, "To me and to Brian." He had not addressed it to us. He had simply written on the last line before signing his name, "If you ever read this, it will mean things did not happen the way I meant them to. You found your way here without me. I knew you would." I read it 3 times. I did not cry. I sat on the attic floor with the letter in my lap, and I did the same thing I had done at 14. I listened. I came down the ladder. I walked into Aunt Helen's kitchen. She was holding her coffee with both hands. I said, "Aunt Helen, I need to call Aaron. I need him to pull 21 years of trust statements before Christmas." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because Dad wrote what was going to happen, and Mom wrote what did happen. I want to read both versions side by side." Aaron drove down from Asheville that night. He did not stop to pack. He arrived at Aunt Helen's at 9 p.m., still in his work shoes. Aunt Helen put a plate of leftover roast in front of him. He thanked her. He ate. He read the letter. When he finished, he set it down on the table with the care of a man returning a borrowed wedding ring. He looked at me. He said, "Tricks. We have to call Jeffrey." I said, "Yes." We called Jeffrey Tate on Sunday morning, November 23rd. Jeffrey lived 10 blocks away in Myers Park. He invited us over. We sat in his sunroom with 3 cups of coffee and a plate of shortbread he insisted on serving. He was 73. His handshake still had the dry strength of a contracts lawyer. I gave him the letter. He read it from the top of page 1 to the end of page 4. He did not speak. When he reached the last sentence, he laid the pages down. He said, "I knew Ethan was going to call me. He had said as much in October. He never called. I assumed he had changed his mind. I assumed he had reconciled. I assumed..." He did not finish. I said, "He posted the letter. It never reached you." Jeffrey said, "It went into someone's hand at the Hendersonville post office and someone took it out of the system." Aaron said, "Or it went into a mailbox at the curb and someone took it out of the mailbox." Jeffrey said, "Or someone watched the mailbox." I said, "Can you authenticate the handwriting?" He stood up. He went into his study. He came back with a manila folder. Inside were 3 letters my father had written him between 1998 and 2003. The same blue ink, the same small, careful slant, the same way of crossing his lowercase t with a downstroke pulled to the right. Jeffrey said, "He wrote this. I would testify in court that he wrote this." I said, "Will you?" He said, "I will." We left Jeffrey's at 11:30. In the car, Aaron called his office. He said 2 words. He said, "Pull beneficiary." He hung up. By Tuesday morning, the bank had emailed Aaron 3 encrypted PDFs. He printed them out at Craven's and Hale and brought them to my kitchen table in Montford that evening. He spread them out in 3 rows: deposits, withdrawals, signature page images. There had been 18 withdrawal authorizations in 21 years. My signature was on 14 of them. I had signed 5, the ones from 2008, the only time I had set foot in that kitchen and put my hand on a piece of paper. The other 13 were not my handwriting. They were close. They were close enough to pass a teller's quick glance. They were not close enough to pass a forensic accountant who had been dating me for 3 years and had seen me sign my own name on the inside cover of every paperback I had loaned him. He stood up from the table. He poured a glass of water. He drank half of it. He said, "She took $84,000. I said, "Yes." He said, "Over 21 years. I said, "Yes." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want my brother." I drove to Knoxville the second weekend in December. Brian's house is at the end of a cul-de-sac with a hoop in the driveway and a small flag that says, "Welcome," above the doorbell. Whitney let me in. Hudson was asleep upstairs. Whitney poured me coffee and went to the back porch with a book and did not ask any questions. Brian sat across from me at the dining room table. I put the letter in front of him. I said, "Read this." He read. He read it 3 times. He set the pages down. He stood up from the table. He walked into the kitchen. He turned on the faucet. He did not pour water. He stood at the sink with both hands flat on the counter. He stood there for 22 minutes. I counted. I do not know why I counted. I sat at the dining room table with my hands in my lap. I did not interrupt. After 22 minutes, my brother turned off the faucet. He came back to the table. He sat down. His face was wet. He said, "Trix, I did not cry at the funeral either." I said, "I know." He said, "I thought you were the cold one. I thought I was the cold one. I thought we were both broken. I let her tell me we were broken. I let her tell me you were worse. I let her tell me everything." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I'm sorry too." We sat at his dining room table at 11:30 at night, and neither of us spoke for another 9 minutes. Whitney came in with a wool blanket and put it over Brian's shoulders without looking at his face and went back to the porch. Then Brian said, "Let me be the one who invites her to the dinner." I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "I am sure." He said, "She will trust me. She does not trust you. I am the only one she trusts." He said, "Tell me where. Tell me when. I will deliver her." I said, "December 14th, Aunt Helen's parents' house in Dilworth, 6 o'clock. He said, 21 years to the day." I said, 21 years to the day. The next 3 weeks were the quietest 3 weeks of my life. Aaron and I made lists. We made lists of evidence. We made lists of witnesses. We made lists of contingencies. We taped the lists to the inside of the cabinet above the coffee maker so that I could see them when I made coffee in the morning. The lists were short. The names on the lists were heavy. Aunt Helen called Jeffrey Tate's old paralegal, who still lived in Charlotte, and asked her to dig out the file. She dug out the file. The file confirmed everything. My father had been preparing to restructure 2 trusts and to file separation papers. The file had been closed and archived 3 months after his death because the client had not followed through. The client had been my father. Aaron tracked down Carlos Mendez. Carlos Mendez had been a paramedic for the city of Asheville since 2010. But before that, he had worked for Charlotte EMS. And before that, he had worked for the small rescue squad that served Hendersonville. He had retired from active runs 3 years ago. He now trained new EMTs. Aaron found him through the paramedic union. He called him on a Tuesday morning. He explained in 3 sentences who I was, who my father had been, and what I was looking for. Carlos asked one question. He said, "Is your fiancé Ethan Lockhart's daughter?" Aaron said, "Yes." Carlos said, "I remember that call. I have remembered that call for 21 years. Where do I come and when?" He came to Charlotte on Friday, December 13th. He brought a manila folder. Inside the manila folder was a photocopy of the EMS report he had filed in December of 2004, including the handwritten note on the back that said, "Recommend review." There had been no review. I asked him why he remembered. He said, "Ma'am, there are calls you do not forget. Your mother said she had been in the shower. Her hair was dry. Her pajamas were dry. The bath mat was dry. I do not work cases. I work calls. but I noted what I noted. I kept the copy. I always kept the copy. He said, "I will be in the kitchen at 6 o'clock on Saturday. If you give me a signal, I will come out." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Don't thank me, just bring your father's name back." Aunt Helen made the invitation phone call to my mother on Sunday, December 7th. She used her softest voice. She said, "Olivia, it has been 21 years. The family wants to remember Ethan. I am hosting at my parents' house in Dilworth. It will be a small dinner, 6 o'clock. Will you come?" My mother said yes. My mother said, "Helen, thank you. I have wanted us to be a family again." My mother said this in the voice she used for the women's club. Brian called her on the same day and confirmed. He said, "Mom, I'll drive over. I'll be there with Whitney and Hudson. We'll see you there." She said yes again. She said, "Sweetheart, tell Whitney to wear the gray dress, the one I gave her. Hudson can sit on my lap." Brian said, "I'll tell her." He hung up. He called me. He said, "Trix, she thinks she's coming to be loved." I said, "I know." He said, "Are we doing the right thing?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." On Tuesday, December 9th, I drove to Hendersonville alone. I did not call her in advance. I parked in the driveway of the 4-bedroom house she had bought in 2011, with money she did not have, and rang the doorbell. She opened the door. She was wearing a blue cardigan. She said, "Sweetheart, what a surprise. Come in." I came in. I sat down on the leather couch in the living room. I put my phone face down on the coffee table. I had set it to record before I rang the bell. I said, "Mom, I came to ask you about the trust." She said, "Which trust, sweetheart?" I said, "The educational trust Dad set up for me, Bank of Charlotte. There are 18 withdrawals." She put her hand to her chest. She said, "Sweetheart, I cannot talk about money. The heart." I waited. She said, "I did what I had to do. I gave you everything I could. That money was as much mine as yours. Your father did not understand. He did not understand what he was doing to me." I said nothing. She said, "Beatrix, I am not well. I have not been well. I did what I had to do. The money I took, what I took, it was already mine." I said, "What money, Mom?" She did not answer. I picked up my phone. I put it in my pocket. I stood up. I walked to the door. She said, "Beatrix, sweetheart, please." I said, "I'll see you Saturday." I drove back to Asheville in the dark. I played the recording at red lights. The sentence, "The money I took, what I took, it was already mine," played twice, 3 times, 5. I called Erin from the driveway. I said, "She confessed she does not know she did. Saturday is not a question anymore." He said, "Then come inside." I went inside. I drove to Hendersonville one more time, the night before dinner. I had to. There are some things you do not ambush a person with, even a person who has ambushed you 21 times. If you can give them a chance to choose differently first, that is not mercy. That is for me. I left Asheville at 5 in the afternoon on Friday, December 13th. I had a photocopy of the letter on the seat beside me. I had a printed page of 14 forged signatures. I had a small folder with the title page of Jeffrey Tate's authentication. I had nothing else. I had not told Erin I was going. I knew he would not stop me. I knew he would say, "Do you want me there?" I knew I would say no. I did not want to hear him say it. I parked in her driveway at 6:15. The porch light was on. She had been expecting Brian. He had told her he might come down to help her plan the menu for Saturday. She opened the door and her face did the small adjustment it always did when she realized she was not getting the person she had counted on. She said, "Beatrix, a sweetheart, I said, I know, Brian is not coming. May I come in?" She let me in. She walked into the kitchen. She put on water for tea. She did not offer me a cup. I did not ask for one. I sat at the kitchen table. I set the photocopy of the letter face up between us. I set the page of forged signatures next to it. I set Jeffrey's authentication on top. I said, "Mom, look at this." She did not look. She kept her eyes on the kettle. I said, "I am going to read you the last paragraph. Then we are going to talk." She said, "I do not want to hear that. I have not been well today." I read it anyway. I read it slowly. I read the line about her by name. I read the line about the divorce filing. I read the line about the trust restructuring. I read the line about Aunt Helen having been left out. I did not read the line my father had written to Brian and me. That line was not for her. When I finished, the kettle whistled. She did not turn it off. The whistle filled the kitchen. After a long time, I stood up and turned it off myself. She sat down in the chair opposite mine. She said, "Beatrix, your father wrote that when he was not well." I said, "Jeffrey Tate has authenticated the handwriting. Dad was lucid. He was preparing to file." She said, "You cannot do this to me. Not now. Not at our dinner. Not at his anniversary." I said, "Mom, I am giving you a chance to come to the dinner tomorrow and say what is true. I am giving you the choice. If you say what is true at the dinner, in front of Helen and Brian and Jeffrey, I will not file a civil suit. I will not bring the EMS report into it. I will let it die quiet." She put her hand over her chest. She started to breathe in shallow pulls. I did not move. I said, "Mom, look at me. No one is going to call an ambulance tonight." She looked at me. She was 21 years older than the night the recital had stopped at 4 notes. She was 64. Her hands were thin. Her hair was thinning at the part. Her eyes were the eyes of a small bird that had flown into a window and was deciding whether to give up. She said, "How can you do this to your mother?" I said, "Tell me what you did with the $84,000. She said, "It was mine." I said, "It was not." She said, "I earned it. He left me. He was going to leave me. I had to live." I said, "He did not leave you. He died." She said, "He was going to leave me. The letter says so." I said, "So you knew there was a letter?" The kitchen got very quiet. She said, "I did not know." I said, "You said the letter says so." She said, "I meant, you just told me." I said, "I told you what the last paragraph said. I did not tell you what the second paragraph said. The second paragraph is where he names the date." She said nothing. I said, "Mom, did you take that letter out of the mailbox?" She did not answer. I said, "Did you watch the mailbox?" She did not answer. I said, "Did you watch the mailbox for 2 days? Because Dad had told you he was sending it. And did you reach into the mailbox on the morning of December 2nd and take it before the postman came?" She put both hands flat on the table. She said, "I want you to leave my house." I said, "I will. Come to the dinner tomorrow. Say what is true, or do not come." She said, I will come, and you will see who I am to this family. I stood up. I took the photocopy and the signatures and the authentication. I put them in my bag. I walked to the front door. I put my hand on the knob. I said, Mom, one more thing. She said, What? I said, Dad's pajamas were dry. His sheets were dry. His hair was dry. The paramedic remembers. She said, the paramedic was a young man 21 years ago. I said, he is 51 now. His memory is fine. He has the report. He kept the report. He will be in Aunt Helen's kitchen at 6 o'clock tomorrow with the original. She did not move. I said, Good night, Mom. I closed the door behind me. In the car, on the way back to Asheville, I called Aaron. He picked up on the first ring. He said, Trix. I said, I think she will come tomorrow. He said, Are you sure? I said, She has to. If she does not come, she has lost. If she comes, she thinks she can still win. He said, And can she? I said, No. He said, Drive safe. I said, I will. I drove home through the mountains in the dark. I did not turn on the radio. I did not cry. I had not cried in 26 years. I was beginning to understand, somewhere on the long curve where I-40 bends north past Black Mountain, that I would cry one day. Just not yet, not in this car, not on this road, not for this woman. I would cry at a wedding. I did not know that yet, but somewhere in me, I knew that. Saturday, December 14th, 2025. 21 years to the day. Aunt Helen's parents' house in Dilworth had been my grandmother's house and my grandfather's house, and now belonged to Aunt Helen by virtue of being the last sibling who had not sold her share. It was a 1925 four-square with a wraparound porch and a dining room that could seat 14 if you brought in 2 folding chairs from the basement. Aunt Helen had brought in 2 folding chairs. At the head of the table, she had set my father's photograph in a silver frame. Beside the photograph, she had set a single white candle, not lit yet. Aunt Helen had said, We will light it when we sit. The candle was a marker. My father had liked to read by one candle in the evening at the kitchen table when I was a child. The candle was for that. Aaron and I arrived at 5:15. Aunt Helen was in the kitchen with Carlos Mendez drinking coffee. Carlos was wearing a navy blue sweater and clean jeans, and the manila folder was on the counter beside the cutting board. He nodded at me. I nodded back. Jeffrey Tate arrived at 5:30 with his daughter, who would drive him home after. He carried a leather portfolio. Inside were the 3 reference letters my father had written him and the authentication notes. Brian arrived at 5:45 with Whitney and Hudson. Whitney was wearing a navy dress, not the gray dress. Hudson was wearing a small bow tie that Brian had told him made him look like Uncle Aaron. Hudson approved of the bow tie. Walter Dane and James Phelan, my father's 2 oldest friends, arrived at 5:50. They brought a bottle of bourbon. They had not seen my mother in 21 years. They had not wanted to. My mother arrived at 6:03. She wore a butter yellow cardigan and a single thin gold chain. She had not been told who else would be there. Aunt Helen took her coat. Aunt Helen kissed her on both cheeks without making contact. Aunt Helen led her into the dining room. My mother sat where Aunt Helen pointed her, the chair next to my father's photograph, the chair where the white candle would soon be lit, Erin sat to her left. Brian sat across from her. I sat at the foot of the table where Aunt Helen had insisted. Aunt Helen lit the candle. She said, "Tonight we remember Ethan." My mother put her hand to her chest. Her eyes filled. She said, 21 years. I still cannot believe he is gone. He was such a good man. He had a weak heart. He did not deserve it. That was the lie. Aunt Helen waited 3 full seconds. Then Aunt Helen stood up, walked into the next room, and came back carrying the wooden crate. She set the crate on the dining room table. She lifted the lid. She lifted out the brown envelope. The envelope had been carefully opened along one edge. The wax of the original seal was intact. Aunt Helen said, "Before we eat, Ethan wrote one last letter. I found it 2 weeks ago in his things. It was meant for his attorney. It never arrived. I believe everyone here should hear it." My mother said, "Helen, not now." That was the denial. Jeffrey Tate stood up from the table. He said, "Olivia, I have authenticated the handwriting. This is the letter Ethan wrote on November 30th, 2004. He posted it on December 1st. It did not reach me. Someone removed it from the mail." He did not say her name. He did not need to. He set the authentication on the table. That was the heavier evidence. Aaron stood up. He opened his laptop. He turned the screen toward the room. On the screen were 3 columns: deposit dates, withdrawal dates, signature page images. He did not narrate. He clicked through them in silence. 14 of the signature page images had Beatrix's name in a hand that was not Beatrix's hand. He clicked through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Brian watched. Walter watched. James watched. Whitney watched. Aunt Helen watched. Jeffrey watched. My mother did not watch. That was the financial evidence. When Aaron closed the laptop, there was 9 seconds of silence. I counted. I have a habit of counting. Brian stood up. He said, "Mom, I read the letter. I cried for the first time since I was 17 years old. I cried because I have spent 21 years thinking my sister and I were the broken ones. We are not. You are." He said, "I have spent 21 years calling you on Sundays and bringing you flowers on Mother's Day and telling Whitney to be patient with you. And now I know what I have been spending those years doing. I have been paying for what you did to him." He sat down. That was the silence. My mother began to breathe in small, shallow pulls. She put both hands on her chest. She slid out of her chair and onto her knees, and from her knees onto the rug. She lay there. She lay there for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. No one moved. Aunt Helen did not move. Brian did not move. Jeffrey did not move. Aaron did not move. I did not move. Hudson, who was 4, looked at his father and did not move because his father did not. My mother opened her eyes. That was the loss of control. Aunt Helen turned her head slightly toward the kitchen. Carlos Mendez walked out of the kitchen with the manila folder in his hand. He came to the head of the table. He laid the folder on the dining room table next to my father's photograph. He opened it. He laid out the EMS report from December 15th, 2004. He laid out the handwritten note on the back that said recommend review. He laid out a printed page of his current statement. He said in a steady voice, "Ma'am, I was the paramedic who responded to your 911 call on December 15th, 2004. Your husband had been dead for between 4 and 6 hours when I arrived. Your hair was dry. Your pajamas were dry. The bath mat was dry. You had not been in the shower. I noted it then. I am noting it again now." My mother stood up off the floor. She did not stagger. She brushed lint off her cardigan. She picked up her purse from the back of the chair. She walked past Aunt Helen. Aunt Helen did not look at her. She walked past Brian. Brian closed his eyes. She walked past Aaron. Aaron did not look up. She walked past me. She stopped at the doorway. She did not look at the table. She did not look at the photograph. She did not look at the candle. She said, "You will regret this." I said, "We will not." She walked out. The front door closed behind her at 6:22 p.m. That was the consequence. When the door closed, no one spoke for 19 seconds. I counted. Aunt Helen lifted the white candle just slightly so that the light moved across my father's photograph and pooled in his eyes. She set the candle down. She said, "Now we eat." We ate. If you are watching this, and there is someone in your life whose love comes wrapped in performances, someone who needs you to be the audience for their suffering, who has spent a lifetime asking you to clap for the wrong reasons, I want you to know something. A boundary is not always the word no. Sometimes the boundary is letting them meet the consequences they made for themselves. Sometimes the boundary is reading the address into a phone and watching them stand up. Sometimes the boundary is dinner. If you have ever had to draw a line like that, comment a single word, the word you needed. I read every one. The next morning, Charlotte police opened a review of the December 2004 death certificate. There was no autopsy from the original case. There was nobody to exhume that would tell us anything. The statute of limitations on most charges had expired. There would be no criminal trial. The case file was unsealed in late January of 2026, marked closed, unresolved. Brian, not me, submitted the civil claim against the trust through Jeffrey's old paralegal. The Sentinel-Times ran the story under a different reporter's byline because I had a conflict of interest and the editorial board took conflicts seriously. The story headline read, "21 years later, a Hendersonville widow faces trust fund theft claim." The story did not name my father except as the trust's original grantor. My mother sold the Hendersonville house in February 2026 to pay back what she had taken, plus interest. She moved into a rented one-bedroom apartment in West Asheville, which was, given the geography, almost cruel. I did not arrange it. The market did. I did not see her. I have not seen her since the front door of Aunt Helen's parents' house closed behind her on December 14th. Brian allows Whitney and Hudson to visit her twice a year, supervised, at a coffee shop near the courthouse. He does not go. He says he is not ready. He says he may never be ready. I have told him that is all right. In the spring of 2026, Aaron and I were married in Aunt Helen's garden. Jeffrey Tate gave a toast. Carlos Mendez sat in the second row in a clean navy blue suit. Brian walked me down the aisle. He held my arm a little too tightly. I did not mind. In place of my vows, I read the last paragraph of my father's letter. I held the letter in my hand. I did not look down at it. I knew it by heart. If you ever read this, it will mean things did not happen the way I meant them to. You found your way here without me. I knew you would. I cried. I cried in front of Aaron. I cried in front of Brian. I cried in front of Aunt Helen and Jeffrey and Walter and James and Linda. I cried in front of 120 people I had never met before. I was 36 years old, and it was the first time in my life I had ever cried in front of anyone. I was not the cold daughter. I was the daughter of a man who had loved me enough to write the truth down, even with no one to read it. Today I read it, today I believed it.